just over a year since I was able to bring the family to Australia. It almost didn't happen. Having got the children Australian passports, we assumed they were fine. So the focus was on getting the visa. And that took a huge effort, which anyone who's undertaken it can fully relate to. What we weren't aware of is additional requirements for the children, because when we got to the airport, Filipino immigration didn't want to let us take the children out of the country despite having Australian passports. There was a requirement to get either a clearance from immigration because the children were born in the Philippines, or if they had Philippine passports, they could leave the country. Nobody told us about this. I didn't do any of my own research about it, so consequently, here we are at the airport. Finally got the visa for Vanessa. Got everything, we thought everything ready, and present ourselves, and they basically turn us away, tell us to go away. Didn't give us any other options. I can understand that many Australians would understandably think that the Philippine authorities would have no right to stop our Australian children from boarding an aeroplane on a flight to Australia, but they can. They're well within their legal rights, and the Australian Embassy would back them up. Now, I'm going to explain what we went through and how I was able to negotiate with Philippine immigration, because had I got up on a high horse and made all sorts of demands about them being Australian children, etc., the story wouldn't have gone well. And I'll explain a little bit later how I handled it. I've got some video that we took just after we cleared immigration successfully, and I'll tell you my approach, how I solved the problem, and what you need to do if you have Australian children born in the Philippines and you're leaving the country. Okay, you excited? Yeah. Are you silly? You look silly. Oh, you're going to do one too, are you? With a bit of a selfie?
No, just go in my side. My Smile. Please.
Okay. So, Vanessa. Excuse me, can you put that down for a second? Can I do mine first? Okay, so what do we have to pay to get out of the country? You had to pay $1,600 for departure tax, and we had to pay
3,000 for
airport tax,
and 6,400 with the kids.
6,400 for the kids
Because they don't have Filipino
because they don't have a Philippine passport, and they weren't going to let them out of the country. The only thing you can do is be nice, because they will tell you when you explain you don't know, well, you didn't ask. We're meant to ask. We're meant to be aware of this. We weren't informed by anyone, and consequently the first response was to tell us that we're going to have to leave the airport, not leave the country, go back, go to immigration and get some special clearance. But they kindly allowed us to pay the money and get out of the country. Right, the audio quality is not the best on that video, so I'm going to take you through how I managed the situation. Now, we arrived at the immigration desk and presented everything. The letter advising of the granting of the visa for Vanessa, their children's passport, my passport of course, and assumed that everything would be okay. But it was when they came to the children that there was a problem, and they were asking for the clearance for the children, which I was totally unaware of. And I explained that I wasn't aware of, and their response was that it was our responsibility to provide it. And look, I attempted to explain that no one had told us about it, etc. But this just resulted in them becoming defensive and taking the position that it is our responsibility, which it no doubt is. So I realised that this wasn't going anywhere, and I changed my tack to sort of saying, okay, yes, it's something I wasn't aware of, but yeah, I understand it was our responsibility, and we haven't got it in. I implored very nicely, is there anything we can do to fix this? That's what I want to focus on. And I would have reiterated that throughout the conversation, half a dozen or a dozen times in a very polite way. And even when Vanessa came up to inquire what the problem was, but we're taken to an adjacent office at this stage, speaking to a senior immigration officer, a lady, and look, she was professional, and as I said, was taking, no doubt, just following the rules and taking the position that without this clearance we weren't going to be able to leave the country. And I explained our situation and how important it was, and again implored that if there's anything we can do. Now, it was this approach that ultimately persuaded them to accommodate us, and they obviously have some leeway, some discretion, which they're not compelled to actually pursue unless they decide to do so. And this is a very good example of where knowing how things work and just giving them respect and basically appealing to their goodwill worked. Whereas I imagine that many others would have become quite irate, quite demanding, and you would have been ushered out of the airport. And the amount of preparation expense involved in rebooking tickets, etc., and going off and getting this, would not have been good. So basically, in the end, they did accommodate us. We had to fill out some forms, and they were able to issue us with the clearance for the children at the airport. Of course, the fact that the mother and myself were there obviously were very important. If I was, for example, the mother wasn't there, I doubt whether it would have happened. So here's a good example. Be respectful when you're dealing with these authorities. They do get a lot of, I suppose, abuse and people who feel entitled or privileged to make all sorts of demands on them, and it's just a simple lesson in treating them with respect, and they did accommodate us and help us. Now, to explain the mechanics of it, basically children leaving the Philippines for the first time either need an immigration clearance, which you get from immigration, or they are the holder of a Philippine passport. Now, we intended to get Philippine passports, but we just ran out of time. And my advice for anyone is to get those Philippine passports, because they serve multiple purposes. One is the requirement for this clearance is not needed. And secondly, it is ongoing proof of their citizenship of the Philippines and will facilitate them coming and going from the Philippines in the future, and again, as I said, establish their Philippine citizenship, because renewing a passport overseas is a lot different than applying for a brand new passport for somebody born in the Philippines who, for example, came to Australia. If I want to get them a passport now, it would be much easier to take them back to the Philippines to do it than to, say, apply in Canberra. Okay, that is basically it. So I appealed to them to help us, and they helped us and accommodated us. But they're under no obligation to do so, and demanding that they do so, I don't think would work. So just be respectful, be polite, and you can often get through these sorts of issues.
Hello all, this is Jeff Harvie here. Now I'm just butting in and adding an addition to Chris and Vanessa's story. Yes, look, that's absolutely correct. There's an Immigration Clearance Certificate, or ECC, that is needs to be obtained for kids leaving the Philippines for the first time with an Australian passport. Now the Bureau of Immigration says 72 hours beforehand, but experience says that 1 to 2 weeks before is safer. Now I'm not sure what this certificate actually achieves, but look, that's Philippines law, and nothing great is achieved by trying to avoid it. Now how Chris handled it, look, that was perfectly. Now, Aussies and other Westerners who spent years living in the Philippines, as Chris has and as I have, look, they either A, learn how things work here, or B, they learn very little and therefore spend their time bashing their heads against the wall, basically. Now, Filipinos are not purposefully obstructive, and not everyone is looking for a bribe. There are two things that you need to understand about Filipino culture. Now, the first thing is that shaming people by abusing them and puffing out the chest in moral outrage and raising your voice, and particularly, playing the great white father with who can show these natives a thing or two about, back in Australia we wouldn't be doing it like this. Look, it offends people, and it makes them a lot less likely to want to help you. If that's somewhere official, you may even end up in jail, so it's really not a wise way of handling things. There was something in the news recently about a Chinese woman who decided to fling whatever she was, I think it was some taho, something which is a local delicacy, to decide to fling that all over an immigration officer who she didn't agree with him, and she ended up locked up, and rightly so. The second point is that the sooner you learn this, the better you'll get on here. Filipinos are very, very kind people. They're soft-hearted. The fact is, you're yelling at them, you're going to hurt their feelings. I mean, you can find big, tough policemen reduced to tears with somebody yelling at them. That's how it is. Not actually very tough at all. But they're very, very kind. And if you smile and ask nicely, you would be amazed at what people will do for you. Now, I would say, absolutely, from experience, without question, your average Filipino will be more helpful to you than an Aussie in the same position ever would, if you can learn to appeal to their better nature. Show you respect their position, which you should anyway. It's just good manners, and they're doing a job. Goodness me, they've got their rules, they have to follow them. They do the wrong thing, they're going to get themselves into trouble, and why should they? Show some humility, and try and inject some humanity into the situation. Kids, for example, as Chris did, if it's grandma with sore legs, or poor old Jeff here with a bad back, inject that in there, and always smile when you're talking to people. Okay, frowns and angry faces, they don't go over very well at all. Always smile. Speak softly. And look, of course, thanks once again to Chris and Vanessa, and also to young Conrad and Celeste there for sharing their story. And we will keep following their story all the way to the end. And we also very much look forward to their wedding, which will most certainly be videoed. Right, Chris? Okay, all the best.